Welcome back, everybody, to the second introductory video on the Old Testament. I wanted to concentrate in this video talking about the geography of Israel. Sometimes it's called the fifth gospel in terms of the New Testament. I prefer to think about it as reading the Bible in 3D, because the land around Israel has an enormous impact on Israel and how the people of Israel experience not only the land, but also God. So I want to give you a tour of the region. You'll be learning it in much more detail as you study your Bible Atlas, but sort of an overview to set the stage and give you an idea of some of the major areas of Israel that had an impact on its history and its people and its relationship with those around them. So join me as we take a look at the biblical land of Israel and maybe also a little bit of a look at modern Israel. Right at the end, I'll share some pictures with you. If you're not the kind of person who enjoys looking at pictures, you can skip that part of the video. But I think sometimes it actually helps to show you what the specific land or archaeological sites look like to help you put everything in context. So join me as we visit Israel. All right, everybody, this is a picture of the modern Middle East. You see the Mediterranean here over on the left or western side. Italy and Rome would be all the way off the map over to the left, the island of Cyprus. Then as we go eastward across the top of the map, we see modern-day Syria. You notice Damascus is right here. When Paul leaves Israel to go to Damascus, this is where he's going. Next country over is Iraq. That would be the home of Babylon, and Nineveh. You see Nineveh all the way up here in the north, Babylon here, and then farther east. The thing to notice about this are the rivers that are going across modern-day Iraq. The Tigris and the Euphrates, and this area in here, which is supplied by various rivers, is known as the Fertile Crescent. One of the maps in a minute I may show you will actually distinguish between grass areas and desert, and you'll see that there is a green area all through this crescent because it either receives enough rain to support grass or it has rivers. And as you can imagine, when people had to travel in that century, they stayed to the green or grassy areas or rivers because they needed water. They traveled relatively slowly, and it was an enormous difficulty to try to carry enough water to cross this big desert here. There is a trade route. You can see the caravan route, but it was dangerous, and people did not normally choose to go that way. If you were down here or over in Iran or somewhere like that, you would follow the rivers up and over and then down through Israel to Egypt. So when they talk about the Fertile Crescent, it's this area in here, and it's called the Fertile Crescent because it had water either from rivers or rain. You see modern-day Lebanon, you see Jordan, and this little weird-shaped country right here is actually Israel, where all this action takes place. Compare the size of Israel to the size of Iran over there on the eastern side of the map, and you see an enormous difference. And if you look closely at Israel, again, we'll take a closer look in a minute, but this little red blob that's kind of existing in the center of Israel is actually the West Bank, is what they call the West Bank, and is part of the disputed territory now. And you can see that it almost cuts Israel into two different countries. Just going on with the overview, we see Egypt here with the Nile River, and coming down, and then I guess the desert of Israel. Just wanted to show you an example of all of this in here is desert, so all desert. But the importance of the Nile for the people, not only in Egypt, but the rest of the people up here, is this land is really relatively arid, and can be absolutely arid in bad times, times of famine. So if you're in Israel and you're suffering from famine because there hasn't been enough rain and you need a sure source of water, the place you go to know that you will always have water is the Nile in Egypt. So Egypt is the normal place for refugees to go of the nation of Israel to escape from famine or to have a very secure supply of water. If you ever see any satellite pictures of the Nile or of Egypt, it is very interesting because it will, all this territory in here will be dirt in the summer particularly, and you'll see the Nile River, and then you'll see a stretch on either side of the Nile that is just absolutely verdant and green for about a mile from the actual Nile River. And at that point, agriculture shuts off, and you get an immediate and sharp transition back to desert. So Egypt, in its fertile part, is very, very long along the Nile River, but once you get away from the Nile River, it becomes desert in most cases. Second thing I wanted to show you in this map are the roads. They did have travel in the time of Abraham and certainly in the time of Jesus, and these red lines are the major roads. So you would see that the roads in general follow the Fertile Crescent up over the top and into Egypt. If you notice, there are a lot of roads when you get in here into Israel. We'll look at that in more detail when we hone in on Israel, but Israel really is kind of the crossroads for this whole area. So if you are in Egypt and you want to get to anything over here because you want to buy something or you want to conquer the territory, you're going to go through Israel. If you're up here in Syria or Iraq, in biblical terms, Babylon or Damascus, you're going to have to go through Israel to get to your big enemy in Egypt. And just in general terms, this will vary based on the particular king and which kingdom is powerful at the time, or which kingdom is not. But the basic geography stays the same. And this is what you see overall, is in general, there is, and sometimes there is a strong military power here in what we see as modern-day Syria. Now, it has different names and different times and places, but very often there is some big military power around in here. There is also, at other times, a very big military power around here. Now, you can see that if this area of territory has a strong king, a lot of military power, and this area of territory has a strong king and a lot of military power, they're going to fight each other because they're going to try to control these roads, they're going to try to control access, they're going to try to get slaves and material from each other. So it's relatively unusual to see both of these places be in power at the same time. Typically what will happen as this place grows in power, this place weakens in power. So you get kind of this seesaw effect back in between the two. If they both happen to be strong at the same time, typically they fight each other until one of them is not strong, and then the stronger one conquers the weaker one. So you have two major areas up here in the north of military power at various times in history. Also, varying at different times in history, you have another area of military power here in Egypt. So there are three major regions in the world with varying kings and stuff, of course. Here in Egypt, there's one more or less in Syria and one more or less in Iraq. Of course, Syria and Iraq don't exist in the biblical times, but you get an idea of the territory. And the way this works out for Israel is, if you notice, Israel is at the crossroads of all of these territories. So if Syria wants to trade with Egypt, they have to go through Israel. If Egypt wants to trade with Iraq, they have to go through Israel. That's why you see all these roads here. And there really are a relatively few number of roads through this territory. Now, what that means for Israel, if Israel can control its territory, it can exact tolls on these roads going through and make an enormous amount of money. One of the reasons that David and Solomon have so much money is, at this point, Israel is militarily strong, the other countries are relatively weak, and if anybody wants to travel through Israel, they have to pay Israel for the privilege. So there's an enormous amount of money involved in being here. Secondly, from a theological perspective, God has given the Hebrews this as their promised land. We'll talk a lot about that as we go through the Old Testament. But He has given them this little piece of land that happens to be the land bridge, the hub between everything in the Middle East. So if the Hebrews are here worshiping their God, there is no way that Egypt can deal with Syria without having to encounter Israel's gods as they go through Israel. So God has put Israel at the hub of the Middle East to make sure that anybody that goes through is going to be exposed to the religion of Yahweh. And if you remember when God makes His covenant with Abraham back in the very beginning, He says, that He's going to make Abraham the father of nations, but it's going to be a nation of priests. So the whole point of the idea of Abraham is to father a nation of priests that can spread the worship of Yahweh or God throughout the whole world. And again, Israel is uniquely positioned to do that. The second thing about this position is that it's also the center of warfare. If you think about this, it kind of makes sense. If Egypt is strong, or even if Egypt is weak, but still stronger than Israel. They're afraid of Syria, Iraq, and Iran, or Babylon and Damascus in biblical terms. And if they're afraid that Syria or Damascus is going to attack them, they don't want to wait until Damascus troops are at their border. So what they're going to do is they're going to try to conquer as much of Israel as they possibly can to let it act as a buffer between Egypt and Damascus. That way, when fighting happens, it will happen up here in Israel, and the only Egyptians that will be risked will be the Egyptian soldiers. So this is kind of the center of battle. Now, by the same token, if Damascus is afraid of Egypt or wants to protect its borders, it's going to conquer as much of Israel as it possibly can, so that any fighting with Egypt happens down here and not on the border of Damascus. So Israel is the crossroads and the hub, not only from a trade or mercantile sense, but also from a military sense. Everything that happens here in this part of the world is going to go through Israel, whether Israel wants it or not. And now you can also see that Israel is in a position where it has to depend on God, because typically it is surrounded by enemies. There are only a few times in the history of Israel when all of the people around, all the nations around Israel are weak. Now, when Joshua leads them into the promised land, I think because of the providence of God, that is one of those times, and they have an opportunity to conquer the promised land without a lot of interference. But normally, out of these 3 or 4 powers, either in the north or the southwest, someone is strong and someone is going to try to have an influence over Israel. So I want to hone in now. I'll pause the video while I zoom in on Israel and give you just a quick tour of Israel. I won't make you watch the zooming in because it would probably make you just a little bit nauseous. So bear with me as I pause the video and we go into a close-up of the nation of Israel. All right, thanks for waiting. We're honed in just in the nation of Israel, and I've sized the map so that you see the traditional borders of Israel. You notice up here in the north, we have the city of Dan, and then all the way down in the south, we have the city of Beersheba or Beersheba. And traditionally, in biblical times, Davidic times, Israel is called, or the Hebrew nation is called, the land from Dan to Beersheba. So this is the land of the 12 tribes. Now, modern day Israel, it goes on down here into the point of a triangle on the Red Sea in the Negev desert. But as then, not a whole lot happens down in the desert other than wandering. So for today, I don't want to pay a lot of attention to that. Understand that Israel goes south down into a point, but it's not significant territory right now. Just a little bit of geography. Israel is a small nation. It's less than 8,000 square miles, about the size of New Jersey. And if you measured it all the way from up here in Dan, all the way down to that point in the Negev desert, it's less than 300 miles. So it's not a big country. And as an impact for modern day Israel, you see the West Bank territory here that I talked about. That's the Palestinian controversial territory. The challenge is that from this part of the West Bank to the ocean is really only 9 miles. So you see there are only a very few roads over there because of the terrain and mountains and swamps and things like that. And the danger to modern Israel is if whoever controlled this territory wanted to split Israel, there are only 9 miles that country or territory or people would have to have an incursion into Israel to totally separate northern Israel and southern Israel and cut one half off from the other. So just one of the political realities of today, we certainly want to be sympathetic for all peoples, but just as the Palestinians might have certain rights and responsibilities, I think the Israel people have certain rights and responsibilities too, and their existence as a nation is certainly one of their rights. And they have to live with the reality that at any time their nation could be cut in half if someone could control this road that's only 9 miles long. So just a modern day reality. From an Air Force perspective, again modern day, Jordan is just a minute or two away by fast jet attack fighter. So you see that if somebody decides to do something, things can get nasty in a big hurry. So anyhow, the nation of Israel, 300 miles, maybe at its very longest point, by 9 miles or so at its smallest point, has a lot of different territory in the country. Again, you see the roads here, and in general the roads are going to follow the passable terrain. Starting over here in the east, you have a major north-south road that follows the desert. Now, if you kind of imagine, if you have a choice between wandering through the desert or this hard rocky land, you get a sense here that this is all bare mountains and deep ravines and stuff like that. Or you have a choice of doing this very flat, grassy, open valley land, that this route is going to be much more pleasant to take and much safer and much easier to take to Egypt than this route through the desert. And indeed, that's what most people did, is they would come down from the northeast, they would skirt the Sea of Galilee, they would take the mountain passes through the Jezreel Valley, and then they would continue through Israel on this road. And if you're dealing with any of the seaports, Tyre, Caesarea is not a biblical seaport, but Joppa and some of the Philistinian cities down here, you would see this road is very accessible to the seaports along the way. So this is the major flow of traffic north and south through Israel. Now, there are some other roads through Israel. You notice this one from, this is the Sea of Galilee up here, Capernaum, where Jesus had his ministry, but there's a road that sort of follows the Jordan River. So that was also a path that people could take and then come over through Jerusalem and then get to the coast. But the major goal would be to go from the northeast through the mountain passes, through the Jezreel Valley, down the coastal plains of Israel to Egypt, or to do it in reverse. So that the main traffic is this way. A couple of one last path that's very much smaller and not really suitable for major traffic is a path that follows this range of mountains here all the way in Israel from the very north to the very south. And this is the path that Joshua uses to enter and control the Promised Land. He crosses the Jordan here, he goes to Jericho, and then he uses this mountainous pathway. It's called the Way of the Patriarchs. And it's not suitable for chariots, it's not suitable for major vehicles or major trade, but it's great for a bunch of people who are trying to travel somewhere and stay out of the sight of everybody else. So these are kind of like the mountain paths that people can go on to move very fast distances, but you have to do it on foot and carry everything you need with you. So Joshua comes in at Jericho, he conquers the northern kingdom, and then he conquers not the kingdoms, he conquers the northern kingdoms, and then he comes back and he conquers the southern kingdoms. So he uses this Way of the Patriarchs along this mountain chain to travel in Israel. If he tried that out here in the plains, he would be very much more exposed, and the people could see him coming from a much longer distance and could attack him much easier. So God in his providence has provided this Way of the Patriarchs for Joshua and his troops to conquer the Promised Land, or to occupy the Promised Land. Some more major cities that you'll want to know, and again, you'll pick this all up in the atlas and you'll be learning them for the map quiz. Jerusalem. You see Jerusalem here just kind of even with the top of the Dead Sea. This is the Dead Sea, and Sodom and Gomorrah would be down here somewhere, maybe a little bit farther south. The water flow starts up here at Mount Hermon around Dan, flows down through here, forms the Sea of Galilee. Sea of Galilee is not very wide, again, maybe 7 miles by 12 or 13, 14 miles. Then from the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River continues down in this Rift Valley, getting lower and lower and lower and lower and lower and lower until finally it reaches the Dead Sea. The Sea of Galilee itself is about 600 feet below sea level, whereas the Dead Sea is about 1,200 feet below sea level. Dead Sea is the lowest place on the surface of the earth. And the reason it is so low is because you actually have two different tectonic plates that are pulling apart here. You've got one plate here and you've got one plate here, and where they join and are pulling apart is this Jordan Valley. So the Jordan Valley, as they pull apart, keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and the water flows down here into the Dead Sea. and doesn't have any place to go. There is no outlet to the Dead Sea. And one of the reasons they call it dead is because as the water flows down, it carries minerals and things like that. And it sits here in this big pool puddle and evaporates and gets saltier and saltier and saltier and more heavier concentration of minerals, until at the end it is so salty that no life can live in the Dead Sea. It's so salty that the specific gravity of the water is so high that you cannot sink in the Dead Sea. If you try to go swimming in the Dead Sea and lean back, it's almost as if you were sitting in a chair. So your knees, your shoulders, your chest are all out of the water because the water is just so heavy and concentrated with so much salt. So another thing is you see Bethlehem here, very close to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is one of the highest areas around. So from the Dead Sea at about 1,200 feet below sea level, you go up to Jerusalem. You always go up to Jerusalem, and you're at about 3,000 feet or so. So Jerusalem is the highest point, and you always, from wherever you are in Israel, you come up to Jerusalem, and then you go down from Jerusalem, even if you're going north. Other cities, Beersheba, we'll show you some pictures of this, but again, typically or traditionally, the lowest or the most southern part of the nation of Israel. Along the coast, you see here the Gaza Strip, which we know of today. And it's interesting that these cities, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gaza, were the cities of the Philistines. So when the people came into the Promised Land, they were supposed to drive out everybody that was in the Promised Land. And somehow they did not drive out the Philistines in this territory. So that remained a bone of contention and a source of trouble for Israel all through biblical times and even into today. So we still see, when you hear about trouble in the Gaza Strip, that's what's happening down there. That's a view of the geography of Israel itself and the major trade routes. What I'd like to do now is take you on a tour of modern-day Israel and show you some pictures. So if, again, you're not the kind that likes to look at pictures, feel free to turn the video off now. If you do want to see what some of these things look like in real life, hang on and I'll show you 5 or 6 pictures of modern Israel and give you an idea of what this stuff actually looks like. Thanks, guys. This is a picture of the Sea of Galilee. I'll enlarge it for you just a little bit here. And obviously more important in the New Testament times than the Old Testament. But even in the Old Testament, it was a center of civilization and life, if for no other reason than it was a source of fresh water, fish, and growth that people could live on. So it was very much populated in biblical times, Old Testament times, as well as New Testament times. Sea of Galilee is not very big. Again, you can see from one side to the other. It's maybe 7 miles or so across. Also, you notice that it's very hilly and rocky around the Sea of Galilee. Again, this has an impact more in New Testament times, but when Jesus, it talks about Jesus going up the hills to get away from the people, these are the kind of hills that Jesus would be going up. So you see, it's not a trivial effort. It's not like going up a flight of steps. When Jesus goes up one of these hills, he really does want to be away from people. By the same token, when the people follow Jesus up the hills, they really want to follow Jesus. So it's an indication of the commitment on their part. Second thing I'd like you to notice about this is walking around the Sea of Galilee could be relatively hard. You're going up and down these mountains all the time. On the other hand, taking a boat trip across the Sea of Galilee is very, very easy. So now you might start to get an idea of why Jesus is always going across the Sea of Galilee to the other side, as you might be able to row or sail across the Sea of Galilee in an hour or two. But if you tried to walk around the Sea of Galilee, it might take you all day or even longer, depending on exactly where you were. So the Sea of Galilee becomes Jesus' area for ministry, simply one reason, simply because he can move around in such a large area in such a small part of time. So this is northern Israel, very lush, a lot of water. Sea of Galilee is a typical site. I'll just mention one other thing about this slide before I move on. And if you notice this middle portion here, there's a big hole between the cliffs. I know we've all heard the stories about the storms that blow up very quickly on the Sea of Galilee. And this valley, this rift, is why those storms happen. First of all, if it's surrounded by mountains, you can't see the horizon, you can't see a storm coming. But this rift is actually the mouth of a funnel, so that this is the narrow mouth. And the storms happen up here, they come rushing down, they go through this funnel, and when they come out this little opening right here at this little hollow place, they hit the lake like a ton of bricks. So that you see very strong winds can be funneled through this natural formation, hit the lake without any warning, and really stir up significant storms in almost no time at all. All right, we've gone south from the Sea of Galilee, and we're standing on the Mount of Olives, looking down into Jerusalem. This is the Kidron Valley down here at the bottom. This is the wall around the city of Jerusalem. This is the Muslim Dome of the Rock. It's where the Holy of Holies of the temple would have been in the time of David or the time of Jesus. And actually the Holy of Holies would have been bigger than this and probably covered with solid gold. So Israel and Jerusalem was a beautiful city. It was a magnificent city with the Holy of Holies showing up in the temple, but it was also a very hilly city, so that you see that you go down to the Kidron Valley and then we're standing on the Mount of Olives. But just an example of what modern day Jerusalem looks like. It's an impressive sight. Just as a tiny detail, you see all these white things along the city walls here and the white things along the walls here. It was actually the same way in the time of David, and those are tombs. And the Hebrews or the Jews went back to Israel to be buried because they thought that when Messiah came, he would actually come out of the temple and leave the city of Jerusalem, and then resurrection would happen in direct proportion to how close your tomb was to the walls of Jerusalem. So in Jesus' time and in David's time, all of the hills around Jerusalem, they didn't have roads back then like this, but all of the hills around Jerusalem would have been covered with these tombs, just so people could be resurrected early. I'm not sure why they thought an earlier resurrection would be of value to them, but that's just what they did. And it comes into play from a biblical perspective is when Jesus is standing on the southern steps of the temple, which would have been somewhere in here, looking out over the hills of the Mount of Olives, and he's talking about the whitewashed tombs. You start to get an idea that he wasn't just making something up, that he really was pulling in an example from real life. This is a picture of the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall. I show this to you to give you some idea of the size of the foundation of the temple. Now this is not the temple itself. This is just the retaining wall or the foundation that Herod built around the temple. You can see that it is just huge. When the Jews rebelled against Rome in 68 A.D., the Romans came in, conquered Israel, and by 70 A.D., they had conquered and destroyed Jerusalem. And they literally leveled the Temple Mount. And this foundation wall is all that's left. But I show you this just to give you some idea of the size and awesomeness of the temple. So this is not the temple wall. This is the retaining wall or the foundation wall that was built underneath the temple. So it's just an enormous thing in the time of Jesus. Maybe not quite so big when Solomon builds his temple, but still an enormous thing, and certainly the center of all religion for Israel. This is a view of the Dead Sea and the surrounding territory. I'm actually up on the top of Masada, looking across the Dead Sea into Jordan here. But I show you this to give you some idea of just a very short distance away from Jerusalem, what the territory is like. And it's called the Dead Sea for a reason. Obviously the water is dead, but the surrounding territory is dead too. You can see that the only green is where somebody is irrigated for a parking lot or something like that. You can also see that this is desert and it changes very, very slowly. Masada is a location in New Testament times where the Hebrews held out against the Roman imperial army trying to kill them, and you can actually see the outline still of a Roman encampment here that's lasted for 2,000 years. But when they talk about the Dead Sea, it's not just the Dead Sea, but it's the surrounding area that's dead. Very dry, very arid, very much anybody's idea of what a desert exactly looks like. I'll end with this picture for several reasons. One is it's a pretty sight. It's very relaxing, very pastoral for us to look at. But secondly, this is where the last battle is going to be fought. When they talk about the Battle of Armageddon, they're talking about the Jezreel Valley, they're talking about the city of Megiddo, and this is up overlooking the Jezreel Valley where the Battle of Armageddon will finally take place. So this is the traditional invasion route from the northeast. And you can see if you've got an army of chariots or even men, with wagons and things like that, this is an ideal territory. You do not want to have to go up and down these mountains or mountains like this that this guy is standing on. But if you can go through this valley, it's a great route for invasions. So this is traditionally the point where the Davidic king would come to fight the enemies from the north, the forces of evil coming into the land of Israel. And I think it's absolutely appropriate for the final Davidic king to come here to meet the forces of evil trying to invade the nation of Israel. So this is where it all ends. But you can see a very fertile, very green in modern day Israel. Almost all of that is due to irrigation. So it's an example of what the Israelis are able to do. If you compare this to what the Dead Sea looked like, you can see that they really have restored the country. Now, in the time of David, this was probably, maybe not this green, but this was a fertile place in Israel. So it was prime territory. It was the kind of thing that everybody wanted to control. And Megiddo was one of David's fortress cities. So it controlled the entrance to this valley, and it was one of the forts that he used to protect the Promised Land, but also to act as a possible threat in case he decided to invade anybody else. So just a very few pictures of the nation of Israel. I'll end with a little commercial that we go to Israel every couple of years. And if you are interested, you can send me an email, and I would be more than happy to send you back details about our next trip. So until we can see each other again, see you guys later.